Welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kirti Patel. Here we place women's health and feminism front and center where they belong, engaging in conversations that range from the fundamental to the fearless. With insights from expert guests, we aim to break through the barriers of the patriarchy and envision a new world led by the Gynarchy. So let's get started and dive right in. All right, welcome to the Gynarchy Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kirti Patel, and today we're going to be speaking with a doula about her work and also what it's like working with her. Her name is HeHe Stewart. HeHe is a doula, the founder of the Tranquility by HeHe Maternity Concierge, the creator of the Birth Lounge, and host of the Birth Lounge podcast. She has a master's degree in human development and family studies and over 10 years of experience in the family life education field. HeHe helps people prepare for childbirth with research-backed education and data-driven support to have a confident birth experience while feeling informed and in control of labor without fear or coercion. She's also passionate about helping people understand their rights around consent and autonomy in birth. So welcome, HeHe. So nice to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I sort of connected with you on the socials, I think Instagram and TikTok. I love your little bite-sized bits of wisdom, and I think my audience will just love you. You provide so much great free education to women. That's much needed. So I thought we'd start by you just telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my background is in human development and family studies. I have a master's degree, and I started out my career in early childhood education, actually. I did a brief stint in early intervention. I spent some time in the classroom, and this gave me a really deep understanding of a couple of things: how to best support parents in their educational journey. That looks like for them, how to best support a family unit. And then it also gave me insight into how parents interact with the systems. And now at that point in my career, I was working with the educational system, obviously. And along my path, I changed to be in birth work. And it started off as something I was just very curious about, because the more I learned about early childhood, the more I saw gaps in that postpartum period, because that's what I was being exposed to. And then as I began to look into birth, I thought, oh, gee, there's so much work to be done here. And there's so much birth trauma and just really bad things happening. And a lot of it could be avoided. And when I looked at how we could avoid it, it really does come down to a couple of things: finding the right provider that is matched with you, having the education that you need to be informed, yes, but also be confident in the decisions that you make, and then also understanding your rights as a consumer of healthcare. And so that's kind of how I got into this industry. This is how I came to kind of support people. Along the way, I also realized that medical misinformation is really rampant out there. As social media has become more rampant, so has misinformation. And so that really pushed us to dive into a data-driven, evidence-based approach so that people know that they can come to Tranquility by HeHe and get as unbiased information as possible. Obviously, with some exceptions, we do stand against certain things, just being in women's health.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that background. So that's really interesting that you started, how you got interested in it and learning about birth trauma, for example. I'm kind of curious, do you have an example of something that inspired you, like someone's experience that was negative that made you think, wow, I could help people like this?
Yeah, I think collectively, it's every corner there's a bad birth story. So there was never one point in time where something I saw triggered me to go into this, but it was the more that I learned about obstetrical violence and the iatrogenic trauma and the cascade of interventions and coercive medical care that can happen, the more I also was aware of it in the birth space. And sometimes it's very blatant, but sometimes it's very covert. And I think collectively just seeing that continuously. Also, as my social media presence has grown, people share their stories. There are obviously really great birth stories out there. I think a lot of people try to highlight that, but bad birth stories get a lot more press, if you will.
Yes.
They go viral a lot more often. It's one of those shock factors where good birth stories don't necessarily land the same way. Although for me, I prefer to see good birth stories because it reminds me of like what birth can be, what that collaborative care can look like.
Yeah, I love that. I'd love to, I want to return to that, but before we get too far into it, could you explain, I'm not sure about how familiar people will be with doula work, but could you define what a doula is for us and maybe how it differs from other people on the maternal healthcare team?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. A doula is a non-medical support for birth, and doulas provide different types of services, but it's typically educational support and emotional support and physical support in the labor space. Some doulas might offer childbirth education courses or prenatal meetings with your doula to prepare you for labor. And then in the postpartum period, doulas can provide services like daytime support, overnight care, and then just general postpartum care because postpartum can be really lonely. I always describe doula care as supplement to what the hospital provides and what your doctor provides. So we know that we don't have enough care providers to care for all the pregnant people adequately. Obviously, we would all love to see much more postpartum care in America. We just don't have that right now. Doulas are really great for that. They can provide you with that support, and they also are a lens to look through to say, you know what, maybe you should call your provider about this. This is something you should alert your provider to, or hey, that amount of bleeding is not normal. You should go to the hospital. And it will help kind of reduce the care gaps that we see sometimes in hospital care.
Yeah, that makes me think of I really do agree, like a postpartum, there's the 6-week checkup and we don't provide long enough support for women afterwards. That's just one example, but I agree with you. So do you do so doulas may do childbirth education classes or one-on-one education. And also do you do like breastfeeding, lactation support, things like that as well? Or is that a separate person?
Yeah, no, doulas have many overlapping skills, qualifications, licenses, certifications. So depending on the doula that you're working with, they also may be a massage therapist, or they may also be a registered nurse. They could also be a lactation consultant or a sleep trainer. So doulas come to the table with many different backgrounds. Our team does provide that concierge support. So it's comprehensive care from pregnancy to postpartum, and kind of anything that you need within there. We either provide for you as your team, or we have people that we recommend. So for example, pelvic floor physical therapy is not something that our team provides in-house, but we have trusted physical therapists that we have vetted and have worked with and have sent other clients to. So we know how they treat people, and we're able to give you their name so that if you want, you can go see them, but you're obviously under no obligation. It just is nice to have that recommendation.
I do think women need more support, and these doctor's visits that we have are so inadequate, so short, so inadequate. And like a book, like What to Expect When You're Expecting also isn't enough, like it's so nice to have a human being to run things by, someone with experience and knowledge. So compared to, a non-medical, meaning that different than a midwife in that way, because midwife can actually do deliveries and support you through. And I also think that I don't have enough time with providers in the office, also in labor, right? Like your doctor is dropping in and checking on you, doing a cervical exam and maybe talking to you for a bit. But it's so nice to have, I assume you're there for continuous support like a midwife, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the additional benefit to having a doula in addition to your midwife or your OBGYN, which they work together, they are not, you're saying it right. Like we don't take the place of any medical provider because we're not medical. So we work in conjunction with your medical provider. But the nice thing is when those medical providers are on shift work, your doula remains the same because it is another continuous support person. Just like if you have a partner with you, they would be that continuous support person as well. And doulas, very interesting fact that not a lot of people know is they're not just for vaginal unmedicated deliveries. Doulas will support, well, depending on the doula that you hire, will support any type of birth. So for example, my team will support a vaginal birth, an induction, a necessary induction, meaning medically necessary, or an elective induction, a chosen C-section, or a medically necessary C-section. There is a place for us in all of those scenarios. And, even home birthers should have doulas. And I would argue that knowing about the hospital system as a home birther is maybe even more important because if you need to transfer, it's very important that you understand care that you're going to receive and how that's going to be different. Same thing with a C-section. People a lot of times will get into a C-section and think to themselves, gee, I didn't realize kind of how much went into a C-section or all the things I was going to be experiencing or even the number of people that were going to be in the OR with me. And that's where doula support could help you understand. We send you with questions to ask your provider so you could ask in your next prenatal. Could you share with me what it would be like to have a C-section? Can you let me know how many people will be in that room? Could you kind of tell me what I might feel during a C-section? And these are things that if you've never been through it before or you've never supported that type of birth, you may not know to ask. And then on your end as the provider, your physicians don't really have time to say these things or to think about it. There's so much they could educate you on. They have to choose what's most important. It's very helpful if you come with questions so your provider can cover what they need to cover. And then hopefully they say, like, do you have any questions? And you can say, yes, I have 4 questions and they should be really quick. They're right here on my paper. Can I ask you really quick? And you're like, yeah, absolutely. And then you kind of bang those out.
Okay, I love that point you made, something that I hadn't thought of also. But yes, like we doctors kind of rotate through and have shifts, and then you might be being handed off to a new doctor. So it's so nice to have a person who's well informed and can speak, on your behalf as well, or support you throughout the entire process continuously. So when you take a client on, when she delivers, or in labor, you're with her the entire time, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
And you're saying that you've worked with a midwife as well. They don't necessarily. So a person may have a doula, a midwife, and medical team.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. We kind of work together as a team, all trying to get that person their ideal birth and help them feel in control of the decisions that are made.
And so, this must limit the number of clients you can take on, right? Or you maybe stagger the due dates, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Each doula is going to take on a different number, kind of whatever their lifestyle or their practice or their team can take on. But yeah, in general, you should be contacting doulas probably in the end of your first trimester, second trimester, so that you can take some time to decide on which doula feels best for you. There will obviously be different budgets and different offerings, different backgrounds and styles and personalities. So interviewing different doulas is a really great idea. I always say leave yourself, 2 to 3 weeks to have interviews with different doulas and then kind of think about the decision that feels best to you.
Is there like a resource where you can that you recommend for searching for doula?
Yeah, absolutely. So just Googling doula in your town or your city is a really great place to start. But also Doula Match, match.net is another really great place. And you can type in your zip code or you can give it just a radius to work with. And it will pop up all of the doulas that are in your area that are active on the site at the time.
I had no idea. That's really fascinating. I mean, okay, thank you. It sounds like a great resource. So, I actually have a lot of women who follow me, and I feel very grateful that I get to work with such a woman-heavy team, like mostly women. And I kind of feel like a lot of people would be interested in knowing how to have a job like that. Like doula work sounds really interesting. You can surround yourself with people you love, women, other women, a community of women. So how hard is it to do this? Like, what do you recommend? Or are there different avenues or paths? Like, what's the typical path of a doula?
Yeah, definitely. There are different avenues. And I just want to know, I love working in a very women heavy field as well. My team is all women and I absolutely love it. I feel very special to be able to work,
yes.
Alongside the people that I do. So yeah, in order to be a doula, so this is a place that is a little controversial within the doula and birth world because there are no required credentials to be a doula. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it is. And
so vetting must be, I'm kind of curious about how you'd recommend vetting a doula. Well, first tell us how to become one.
To be a doula, there's no necessarily required credentials. You have different avenues that you can consider. You can obviously go in with no training, and this could include someone who has like familial or cultural practice that does not necessarily need a mainstream training. Then you have people who take mainstream trainings, and then you have people who might not take a mainstream training but might have additional credentials like an RN. Like an RN may not necessarily need to take a doula training. Doula trainings vary from being a 2-day weekend course to 12-week courses to 1-year online programs. And they all come with various types of mentorship and kind of business support, if you will, or continuing education. Some of them come with none, and some of them come with really high touch type of support. So you can see that there's a wide variety of ways to become a doula. A couple of things that encourage people to become a doula. And I only say this because it typically impacts their practice. So some people come to doula work because they themselves had a traumatic birth and they want to prevent that for people. And then some people come to it because they want to prevent that and they don't have their own birth story. And they see it in other ways. I know I keep using an RN as an example, but right now we're seeing a lot of RNs leave bedside and become doulas. Now, to answer the question of how you interview, I think you can ask a couple of different things. Think about what's important to you. What does this person offer as their services? Do you like their personality? You should ask about their background. So ask them if they have taken a training. Ask them if they have any formal education or they have a college degree. Ask them if they have other certifications or do they hold any licenses. You can ask very pointed questions about people's backgrounds. Asking how long someone has done this, has been in this work is, maybe of interest to you. I do want to note, though, just because someone has started as a new doula does not mean that they're not good at their job. You can have someone who's just entered the field of being a doula, but they have a background of supporting people for the last 8 years, and this just happens to be the first year they've served as a doula. So don't discount someone or discredit them just because they don't have a ton of births under their belt or they've just started. I personally love to ask about business insurance. There is a population of doulas who do this more of a hobby or and not to discount or not to say that these people do it out of not out of the loving of their heart as a hobby, but sometimes it's just to give back to their community, or it is just something that they like to do for the women in their life. So it's not always a business. So that may be important to you. It also may not be important to you. Understanding the role that they play. So some doulas are going to be very hands-on and some doulas are going to be very hands-off, and they may just sit in the corner and hold space. That may be important to know. And you may have preferences on the role that you want your doula to play. So these are all really great questions to ask in an interview. I actually have a list of 8 questions that's a free download, and I can give it to you to put in the show notes so people can at least have 8 questions to start with. And it talks about the training and everything.
Okay, thank you. That would be a really helpful resource. Yeah, because it's kind of hard to know. I often say with regards to finding a provider, for example, like, you kind of have to just meet somebody and see if you click. Also, personality matters a lot, whether you are going to approach things the same way or think about things the same way. If you also get a sense of like how they think about problems. When I asked you about training, I definitely did not want to imply. I also think like we shouldn't be gatekeeping something like supporting a woman at the bedside, so I don't mean to suggest that. I think people, a family member could serve as your doula, for example, someone who's just been through birth. So, but I think if you're looking for a professional doula that isn't a person that you trust anyhow, that's a support person in your life, then I think it becomes important to kind of, just as we screen anybody, our friends even in our lives, right? Friends or partners or whatever. So, and I do, you mentioned home birth earlier, and I think this may be a point where we disagree. We can disagree, but be friends, right? So I don't know that I will just admit that I am not a fan of home birth. I am a fan of natural birth, like with doula support or midwifery care, midwifery deliveries. And I've worked with midwives. That is just really scary to me. Like we in the medical field, at least, there are times when you have to get a baby out in 10 minutes. So that's where I would get a little nervous. So this is something to think about too, right? A doula isn't going to provide a home birth, but, a doula with the philosophy of supporting a woman at home birth, you might have other questions. You may want to, like you said, I guess maybe expand on what you about that, maybe.
Yeah. So I have two initial thoughts. My first thought, and I hope I don't offend you here, is
you won't offend me.
Out of like complete love, but just remember that the births that you see as an OBGYN are typically the ones that go wrong. So your exposure to home birth certainly is one that is skewed in the direction of seeing things that go really bad. And I've been a part of those births, and I understand that. I totally get it. You never want to see that again.
Yeah, exactly.
You never want that for somebody. You know that could have been prevented if they had just been in the hospital. But there is so many more that go completely right. And those women are healed from bad births. They find a piece of themselves that they knew was there, but didn't know how to get out. They find confidence and just like on 2 feet to stand on. It can be really one of the most transformative. I just got chills, like full body chills, actually, thinking about it. It can be so transformative. Here's what I will say too, and this is my second point. It's easier for me as a doula to support someone's autonomy because I don't have to be in the position of saving people's lives when it goes really well. But the autonomy piece for me is where that lies. If that person is informed on the risk of their home birth and they're informed on their individual factors and how this may play out, and they understand the risk of if things go wrong, how that may play out, if they understand the risk of how far they live from the hospital or their midwife's credentials, or declining this or accepting this, then for me, even if I don't agree with them, and even if it's not what I would choose for myself, I support them. It doesn't mean I will subject myself to it. So any doulas that are listening, or OBs that are listening, or midwives that are listening, you're allowed to set boundaries of the cases that you take on. Now, I don't know if that's true with hospital policy and employment, but you as an individual, if you don't feel comfortable taking on a client who you know is having twins at home and they live 30 minutes from the hospital, and that just takes your breath away, and you could not even imagine being the doctor that they, transfer to, you should think about saying no to that person for yourself, to keep you safe, but also to give that person the opportunity to find an OBGYN that is comfortable with those risks, because they are out there. I know those OBs, I'm friends with them. And it kind of goes back to being this neutral place. I try to walk a very neutral line of, if you want an epidural, I want that for you. If you don't want an epidural, I am not going to let anybody even say the word epidural in your birth room before you say it's okay. So we can be anywhere on any spectrum for the most part, and I will support you. Here's a personal example. I support free birth. I support your choice to choose free birth. I will not attend a free birth because I need to keep myself safe emotionally, mentally, professionally. If something were to go wrong, I could not live with myself knowing that I was at a birth that did not have a medical professional there. So you're allowed to set those boundaries.
Yes. No, I don't think we're far off because, I agree that at the end of the day, the person in charge of their life is the woman, and she has autonomy. She makes decisions. She's a smart human being. And I think a well-educated person making her own decisions, should be allowed. And we shouldn't be taking that freedom away. But I love what you said, that you can decline as a doula or a midwife. You may recommend, a safer environment, for example. And yes, and I also, while you were talking, I was kind of thinking like, it does seem silly. There are women who deliver in cars and in their bathroom. And, there are some deliveries just meant to smoothly fly. And really, you don't even need an IV or anything,
Yep.
So it seems silly to say, oh, no, you have to come in and do XYZ. However, there's going to be, those are, I think you're right, as a doctor, we've seen inappropriate home births, right? So that's like nightmare fuel for me and other gynecol OBGYNs, right? Because there'll be someone with a C-section before having a home birth. And, we know that scar can tear and some tragic things can happen. So yes, I think that's really good to point out that patients should be educated on properly educated on the risks and benefits, and also you as a doula and midwives and other care providers should also, take that to heart. You also have rights as well in this situation. So sorry, I went right to something really tough, controversial topic. But, I also have to agree that we do, the risk of being in the hospital is right. Over medicalization, doing too much, inducing, doing too many exams, getting all worked up about progress that's not happening on our schedule, so I kind of get the fear. So I guess, I want to hear about how you educate your clients about that. There's a kind of power and knowledge imbalance, right, between the medical team and patients. And you're kind of helping to close the gap there, right, which I love. Yeah, if your doctor says, oh, no, we have to do this, it's kind of hard to decline if you don't know. So, your thoughts.
Cool. So I think we encourage people to do two things. Tap into your intuition and let's see what your gut is saying. I trust that mom intuition so much. I mean, moms are so smart. They know things before our technology and our machines are going to pick up on it. We just have to listen to them. And when we look at our maternal mortality rate, a lot of the deaths could be prevented if we just listen to women and truly listen to what they were saying. But listen to your gut intuition. And then number two, let's follow the science. Let's follow the data. Let's test. Let's make decisions out of data and not out of fear, right? So you through a couple of scenarios and I can tell you how we might educate people. So let's talk about a 39-week induction. Our clients are very educated that if you're a low-risk pregnancy and you're looking for a low-risk or low-intervention birth, possibly unmedicated, but even if you want an epidural, that's really the only intervention you want, we should wait for spontaneous labor. It is safest. Your body will tell you if it needs help. You will start to see things. You will start to have headaches. You will start to have high blood pressure. You will have rashes. You will have drooping of the face. You will have terrible, intense pain. You will have bleeding. Your body has these signs and symptoms to tell us that it needs help. in the end of pregnancy, that is what the monitoring is for. We're checking your baby. We're checking your placenta. We're checking your vitals. If you guys look good, why are we intervening? For things like a due date, our clients are well equipped to have the conversation of, if they're a first-time mom, they know that their baby is probably going to be late. The mass majority of first-time babies are. We talk about a comfortable date for them to choose an induction should they be approaching that 42 week. What happens if they decline an induction? Are they allowed to go 42 weeks? How will that impact their care in the hospital? What kind of risk are they assuming if they do that? Does it limit any sort of options you're going to have in the hospital if you need to go into the hospital? That 39-week induction, typically when our clients are introduced to the idea, it's by us in their prenatals, not by their doctor at 38 or 39 weeks. So that's a big difference, is our people not only know it's coming, but they also are informed on the risk and the benefits and the alternatives, and what if they decline and what if they accept and what will their options be in each of those, and how to have these collaborative conversations with their provider so that when they get to that appointment, A, they're not caught off guard, but also B, that's not a bunch of information coming at them and they don't know how to engage in the conversation, right? Because then you just leave feeling overwhelmed, like, oh, they just told me a lot of stuff and I left with an induction date and I don't even know why.
Yeah.
I barely remember what the date is, you know?
Yeah, I think that's great. It's, and that's where it's helpful, again, to have a doula or another person to bounce ideas off of and perhaps kind of help interpret what happened, right? Do you ever have conflicts with medical providers? How do you navigate that? Or have your clients had conflicts, and how have you had to, help them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you work with other humans, there are going to be times that you disagree. And that's what I would call it, is just times that your medical team might be saying something and the data is saying something different. As your doula, you shouldn't really be saying you should or shouldn't be doing this. What you should be saying, though, is here's what the data says. So, for example, your doctor may say that you need to induce for a big baby because the risk of shoulder dystocia goes way up. Well, the data says that actually inducing for big babies doesn't help anything. And if that baby gets too big, we should actually just give a C-section. But that a vaginal birth is totally appropriate. Now, if that mom wanted a C-section and that felt good to her, or she wanted an induction and that felt good to her, she should be able to choose that. If she wants an induction and wants it and her provider hasn't brought it up, she should be able to request it. Or that's my personal belief. But if she doesn't want it and she's actually not concerned, even with the scans, even with maternal estimation, even if her doctor palpates her belly and all three of them, her estimation, the scans, her doctor, they all agree, yeah, this baby might be a little bit on the larger side, but she as a person is not worried. She's very committed to an upright labor. She's very committed to an unmedicated vaginal birth. And she would like to not have an induction for a big baby. That may be a place where you see that she goes with what the data says and that she actually declines what her doctor says. But it's really up to her.
Our C-section rate is very high in the US. And that is, over-inducing is one of the things blamed for that high rate. I think the World Health, I think the last time I looked, it was like around 30% of births are C-sections, which is quite large. And according to the World Health Organization, it should be really around 10 to 15%. So yes, we are probably, doing this too much. And it's partly because of medical legal risks and, yes, things like inducing for perhaps inappropriate reasons. So it's not the worst to think about this and look at the data and talk to your doula or other healthcare provider and ask these questions. And I think a lot of people don't even know to ask the questions, right? So what are some other concerns you have with modern medical care for women and, in maternal care, besides you mentioned inductions when a patient isn't ready or feeling like they need that.
I think you nailed it when you talked about over medicalization. I think, again, I hope I don't offend you as an OB, but I think pumping our system with midwives would really benefit a lot of people. I think midwifery care is the answer to a lot, especially as low risk women. And then we could really have our OBGYN specialize in the people who require that higher education or a surgeon, or it's kind of like a tiered system. And you don't always have to leave your midwife to see an OBGYN, but maybe an OB and a midwife are collaborating with your case. Or maybe you do leave your midwife and you go see an OBGYN, and then you have an MFM that's pulled in because you've now become a little higher risk. That over medicalization, I do want to point out that it is very validating and just feels really good to have an OBGYN admit that we have over medicalized birth and that inductions are a problem, because it can feel very disheartening to constantly hear providers say that non-medical elective inductions are not the problem, when I think it's very obvious that they really are. I am pro-induction when needed. So if you have preeclampsia, you have gestational diabetes that's uncontrolled, your baby is FGR, right? If you come in for reduced fetal movements and we're not feeling good about it, or we can't get you to feel confident enough to go home, we need inductions in these cases. Sometimes we need C-sections in these cases. These things are not bad. They are just overutilized. In terms of what I wish was a little different, I wish evidence-based education was the norm, and it wasn't the norm to scroll TikTok and get your information from just people who have had babies. And I do believe, I have never had a baby, and I do believe those people have wisdom that I will never have until I have a baby. I do think that you hold wisdom after having a baby that you will never be able to gain before having a baby. But that typically is those people's experiences. And so we want to make sure that if you're educating yourself for a situation like birth that could turn any way at any time, you're truly having evidence-based information so that no matter what pops up in your labor, whether it be good, bad, or mediocre, you are prepared not only for what to do and how to respond, but what your options are, how to have these conversations with your provider. How do you actually weigh the pros and cons, make a decision in that moment?
So many thoughts about what you just said. Thank you. Thank you so much for pointing out. Of course, there are definitely medical indications for induction and intervention. Medicine has helped women survive deliveries and have healthy children and prevent some birth traumas, of course. So we don't want to minimize that, but I do think that it can go too far, like you said, and we're intervening too much, and that's what contributes. One of the other things that contributes to high C-section rates. But and that sort of made me think, like, we just have this culture of focusing on the baby first. Mm-hmm. And that's not really a philosophy. Of course, we care about the baby. We care about this mother's precious child, right? But my patient is always first the mother, and I think we need to remember that. And I think pressuring a woman to make decisions on behalf of her child versus herself, sometimes these things come in conflict, actually. And I always think, like, well, I'm taking care of the human being in front of me first. And then I also want a safe, happy, healthy baby delivered for her. So there's an order of thinking of this that I think sometimes is lost, especially, this abortion conversation always makes me lately, in the political sphere, makes me think of this. And I just want so much people to remember that the woman is the number one, our number one priority. And I do agree with you, actually, like with the regards to needing more midwives. We have a shortage. I actually think, I don't know what OBGYNs disagree here. I guess they are because they consider perhaps midwives as competition to their business, but I don't see that. 50% of the population is women. There are not enough OBGYNs. And I also think that we need to, if we think about ancient times, we started out as human beings, women supporting each other through the phases of life, menstruation and pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum and breastfeeding and all these things. And then there was this, the patriarchy obviously intervened and decided you can make money on this. And of course, there's been medical advances, which are wonderful, science, but there's also been trauma related to that. We need to keep this in mind. And there needs to be a balance. There needs to be medical care, but also returning to our community and support. There's no harm in including a doula and a midwife and other people, caregivers, as part of the medical team. It only makes things better. We don't have enough support for women, really, right?
I agree. And I circle back to one of the things you said about a happy, healthy baby.
Yes.
So you were talking about women being their decision maker, and I am in full support of that. One thing that I find very traumatizing in the birth room is when providers say, well, all we want is a happy, healthy baby, or happy baby, happy mama, or at least you have a happy, healthy baby. But when you look around, it actually isn't happy or healthy. That baby is in the NICU. That mom had a 4th-degree tear and a hemorrhage and pushed for 5.5 hours, and she almost had to have a C-section. Or, that baby needed a 15-minute workup. They didn't have to necessarily be taken out of the room, but it wasn't great. Mom is not doing well. Just not happy and healthy. So as providers, and this is kind of anyone, this is doulas, nurses, anesthesiologists, anybody, be mindful that if it actually isn't happy and healthy, maybe think about presenting that idea a little bit differently with some different words. Because it does not land the same way as it does if it is a happy and healthy baby. A lot of people will say, my baby is alive, but not happy and healthy,
That's a good point. Yes. It's so important to frame things properly and for the context, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And yes. And I think that isn't just the end goal. We don't want to cause trauma to women. We don't want these experiences to be, this should be the happiest time, one of the happiest times of your life. And it sometimes is not. And it's, like you said, it can haunt women and kind of leads them to perhaps never do it again or affects their experiences going forward, right?
Yeah, it can't always be positive, and that's the unfortunate part. But when it does go badly, the way that you're cared for and spoken to and kept in the loop can make all the difference. Humans are okay in bad situations. We are resilient, but what we're not resilient against is being in a bad situation and also being treated badly. That just does us, it leaves scars that are very, very deep, where we can actually repair some of those scars by having amazing care. People will say, my birth wasn't great, but my medical team saved my life. My medical team treated me so well. My medical team made me feel so safe. I knew it was bad, but I never felt in danger. And that's what we want.
We've been talking a lot about, support during labor, but I want you to also share, my understanding is you mentioned you do a lot of other work besides just support during pregnancy and delivery, right?
Yeah.
What other kinds of services can you offer?
So the Birth Lounge podcast is my podcast. It's free. It has 2 episodes every single week. People can tune in and get evidence-based information there to help them through pregnancy and birth and postpartum. And I'm starting to kind of expand into motherhood a little bit. We've had a lot of requests to cover topics in motherhood itself. So Tune in for that. And then the Birth Lounge is an online childbirth education space that does exactly what we talked about today. It teaches you evidence-based ways to stay in control and have a positive hospital birth and work collaboratively and respectfully with your care team while getting your birth preferences met and respected, or having these conversations and pivoting your birth preferences to match your pregnancy or the labor that you have or the choices that you want.
And you're taking clients actively too, I assume? Okay.
Yeah, I am. So we are local to the New England area. So we do one-to-one services there. And then we also have virtual services across and outside of the US. So if you're hoping to work with us and you're not in the New England area, we do take a couple of virtual clients each month.
Okay, great. You know what? I forgot. I had one audience question. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this is from Anonymous. What is one misconception about doulas that you encounter most often, and how do you address it with expectant parents?
Nice. I think that the most misconception is that it's only for that unmedicated vaginal delivery. I would say, if you are having any sort of interventions or you want that, or just simply knowing that by going to the hospital, you might need those, it's probably really wise to have some education around that. That way you can be the one that's making the decision. You can decline what doesn't feel good to you. You can accept what does feel good to you. And you have the confidence and the words to navigate that with your care team so that you all can kind of stay on the same page. So I would say that's the number one misconception.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to add before I let you go?
No, but just thank you for being here. This was really refreshing. It's so nice to come across OBs that believe in this collaborative care and they don't see midwives and doulas as competition. And, they really do value autonomy and respecting their clients' wishes. It's very heartwarming. And I know our medical system is not doing right now, but it gives me hope that there's a lot of us out there right now just pushing us forward to a better place where women will eventually have really amazing births. And I'm very excited for that time.
Thank you, HeHe. I like to think that most OBGYNs feel the way I do and are not threatened by having more support for their patients. That. So, okay, do you have socials that you'd like to share?
I do. Yeah. Everyone can tune in at Tranquility by HeHe on Instagram and TikTok. And then we're just the.birth.lounge on Instagram if you want lounge specifically.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to leave with my closing thoughts, something I do with every episode. So the patriarchy negatively affects maternity care in several ways. By not prioritizing women's health, underfunding the care of women, by over-medicalizing care, not providing enough women-led support, by dismissing women's pain. We didn't even get to talk about that, but that's another problem. And by focusing more on the baby over the mother. In the Gynarchy, we prioritize women and women's health. We appreciate the medical advances that have helped women achieve safer, less painful, and healthier births, but we also emphasize the importance of women to be educated about pregnancy and childbirth, make decisions about the experience they'd like to have, and how important it is for women to have support people such as yourself, such as doulas. So down with the patriarchy and up with the Gynarchy.
I love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, HeHe. You have a great day. Did you enjoy this episode of the Gynarchy Podcast? Know someone else who might enjoy this conversation? Make sure to subscribe and share the show with your friends and family. Find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and just about anywhere you find podcasts. On social media, we can be found on Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok at The Gynarchy. Thank you so much for listening.